much, Anurakti, for having me, and thanks to AAS also for, giving me this opportunity to present my work and, connect to a larger network of scholars. Um, so, if I had to mention, currently I am in the academia. I'm an academic professional. So I'm working at the Department of Liberal Arts at IIT Hyderabad. I happen to be also the chair of the department. And my areas of interests currently are body image, which is what I work on, with a lot of engagement and passion. That's been something close to my heart for a long time. Uh, I work on travel narratives of women. My primary training has been in English literature and cultural studies and gender studies, but over time I have sort of diversified into fields that I feel are very relevant as cultural discourses, very close to our lives and impact us in various ways. So these are some of the things that I have been working on. Um, to be very honest, my training and background has largely been in American literature, in the Western canon, as it were, which happens to be the case for many, post-colonial scholars who are perhaps trained in these disciplines. But over the last, maybe I would say about 7 to 8 years, I have, channelized my focus into more of Asian studies, into Indian studies, South Asian studies, and I'm presently looking at quite a few topics, which are both of cultural and literary relevance to, most of us who are living through it, and also, they make substantial contribution to literature, culture, films, and so on. So currently, those are the areas that I do work on. So presently, the two fields that I work most specifically in are body image studies, and that includes all of humanity, if I may say so, because it impacts everybody really. Women, of course, more at the receiving end of this whole debate, but men equally, people with alternate sexual identities, alternate body types, disability, children, older people. So we have ageism, ableism, all of it impacting people, right? So that's something that I work very closely with. And while there's been a lot of empirical, psychological, psychiatric intervention in this field, cogent cultural debates, theoretical interventions, and policy level discussions, jurisprudence in this area has been missing. So if I had to mention as to what brought me to this, it's actually more than any particular book or film which came up later, is my own lived experiences, to be honest, because as growing up through the late 90s and around that period, the whole economy in India opening up to globalization, liberalization, and the images that were bombarded to us of, what the global body standards were, and sort of trying to negotiate and perhaps fit myself amidst all of this. And that in itself was quite an experience. And as life happened, and growing up and moving to different cities across India, I did realize that this was one of the most, impactful issues that affect our lives in very intimate ways. And yet it's that elephant in the room that remains often unaddressed even today, right? I mean, I understand the growing body of, scholarship and activism, debates around body activism, body positivity, body acceptance, but there's still a lot to do. So if I had to then come back to books, maybe, it started with the Western feminist scholars and the scholars of color, like the ethnic scholars, as it were. So from Susie Orbach to Naomi Wolf to Susan Bordeaux, these were some of the writers and theorists whose books were really impacting me as I was studying through my, the undergraduate years and so on. But of late, I see a lot of my Indian cohorts also, Radhika Parmeshwaran, who's of course an academic in the West, but she has worked very, intensely in this field. And we have in India our own scholars like Shailendra Singh, who's also quite a, he's an upcoming scholar in the field of body studies. There have been a couple of books which have come out, talking about this issue, but not with the kind of, intensity and engagement perhaps that it requires. So yeah, and films, I mean, there have been a number of them, but one of the latest films which really I found to be impactful, and that's of course a Hollywood production, The Whale. Brendan Fraser playing the the central protagonist, and the ensuing interviews were very, very impactful, I must say, because he did mention how fat shaming, obesity, body shaming continues to be one of those sanctioned areas of discrimination in the world even today. And perhaps, it's high time that we looked at, these issues of discrimination. So body image studies is something, like I said, and I've been very deeply engaged in. And the other, of course, is travel writing and experiences of travel for Indian women specifically. Um, this whole issue of women not being able to access public spaces with the kind of freedom that maybe their male counterparts would. And this is true for people across classes, though I understand that the economically deprived classes which have to access public transport find it way more difficult, or they have to foot it the entire journey, perhaps they find it way more difficult. So but all classes, really, I mean, women across ages in most of these parts, there's a very interesting book that has come out about the Me Too movement in India and Africa in just 2024. So it talks about how these continents and these countries have been sort of unaccommodating where women and their access to public spaces is concerned. So I think that that's also something that I found profoundly engaging, and and want to contribute more to. So yeah, these are the two primary areas. In terms of the number of books and events, well, the Nirbhaya event, the unfortunate, the global outcry also that followed the unfortunate event, that happens to be one of those landmark, moments, as it were, in our own social history, where we were kind of jarred to a realization that the public spaces are so hostile for women in India. So yeah, I mean, these have been some of the things I've been working on. So, as it happens, because uh, with regard to maybe travel narratives or access to public places and public roads and spaces and so on, perhaps there has been some action taken from the sides of governance, from authorities. We have some forms of pink taxis that have come up in India. There is reclaim the road movement that's happening in various parts of the country. And yet, I mean, at the level of policy, while there is one understanding of a, a, a space for social justice and equality for women and their empowerment to mobility, um, much needs to still be done. So I think the biggest hurdles would come up in reaching out to people, right, to more and more people, and perhaps explaining, taking this message across to the world as much as possible, that spaces need to be open to one and all for mobility and progress, for each and every individual to grow, as it were. Now that is a mammoth task, and in certain parts of the world, given the cultural conditions we live in, it's not going to be easy. There are many people who would not even want to open up to the problems they are facing, because it's a matter of livelihood, it's a matter of their daily habits and practices. And yet once they open up, you do realize the kind of challenges they are facing. So some of the ways in which, and this, of course, it cannot be done in isolation, or one or two individuals obviously cannot take this up. It has to be a much larger voice altogether, right? So in such a case, perhaps if we had laws, if we had more of policies to help people reclaim the road, to be able to move about freely, if there was more and more awareness, which will be a matter of time, because cultural revolutions, unlike scientific ones, take a lot of time. Eh, Perhaps decades and even centuries pass by the time certain cultural changes take place and gain success in a given situation. So I think the biggest challenge here is to present this message, to as many people as possible to take it to them, and we require the help of, as it were, law, of policymakers, of, the people who provide security in, various public spaces, all of them, along with academics and intellectuals, perhaps coming to the same platform. uh, for people like me who are in the academia, perhaps the few contributions we are trying to make is create, cogent bodies of scholarship that can be presented to the stakeholders, and where we try to bring in various voices, from both fictional and non-fictional settings, from, real lived experiences where interviews, ethnographic studies are brought into account, and there are cases where we look at representations of women's experience and taking it out more and more into the public sphere. So, to be honest, any kind of social change that has happened till date has come through this kind of, a social momentum, as it were, a cultural momentum that it managed to gather, right? So the efforts would be in that very direction. Likewise, for the case of, body discrimination, appearance-based discrimination, which remains, of course, far less talked about, especially in countries like India, right? So when it comes to sectors like hospitality, aviation, even the corporate sector, appearance plays a strong role in, defining one's career path, in seeing whether they, or in bringing them success or failure in certain cases, right? So again, that is something that would perhaps require the intervention of both law and policymakers, social awareness, right? And at a more personal level, the marriage market itself, right, which also continues to define women's and men's life, and lives of people of various other kinds of, body identities, right, in profound ways. So romantic relationships, matrimonial relationships, social acceptance, right? So at that level, I also feel that if, these could be part of social studies curricula in school, to begin the awareness as early as possible. So these would be some of the ways in which we could go about it. In terms of the hurdles, well, some of these ideas are so deeply culturally ingrained that to break past them and to bring in an inclusive worldview will, like I said, take time and noise from the sides of, intellectuals, activists, scholars, policymakers, and so on. The fact that, we as a country, while we're making enormous progress in certain ways, there also continues to be the huge issue of poverty, of unemployment, of kind of a booming population. So amidst all of this, the priority areas very often are very different, right? So to gain the attention of policymakers, of subjects to even talk about these issues. So while some of these issues profoundly impact the lives of almost everybody, uh, they don't get the kind of attention because, when there is malnutrition, when there is unemployment, when there is extensive issues of domestic violence, of physical violence, of economic, crisis in various quarters, issues like body image sort of, take a back seat. And yet you will find in every nook and cranny of the country, whether rural, even rural and urban, of course, you find a beauty salon, you find hoardings of, prettifying oneself, you find gymnasiums where men are working out to have a certain body type. So the identity and its understanding is definitely impacted. But in a country like this, I think the main challenge that one faces when working on a subject like body image is to first make, everybody who's involved in the process, and actually everybody is involved in the process, to understand the relevance or significance of the issue in their lives, right? So it's often, been sidelined, this issue, because it's seen as a fairly trivial issue to begin with in feminist circles. And understandably, when you have very deep, grave problems that, people have to address, this probably seems to be something trivial in comparison, right? And yet so many women are willingly undergoing the knife to, to attain kind of everlasting beauty and youth. There is eating disorders on the rise everywhere. the impact, I mean, keeping the issue of choice aside, the fact that choice in itself gets culturally defined for most people, right? So that sort of an awareness or building it is one of the main challenges for, a country like India, where uh, whether it's ethnographic research, whether it's quantitative research or it's theoretical research, it's a bit hard to find space for a topic like this, which is so burning, so relevant, and yet gets sidelined because there are so many other issues. And to a large extent, I would say the same is for maybe women's travel narratives, because that too, women have to travel, they have to step out in order to complete their daily chores, their daily duties, to earn, to survive, basically, right? So I would say that we live in these interconnected spheres where many of these issues are actually interconnected, but the ones that probably scholars like me are working on just require some more space and voices in order to be heard. So, well, quite a few courses actually. So, to begin with, I have been associated with the IIT system as a faculty member from the beginning of my career. So, here at the undergraduate level, teaching has to be more, when you talk of the humanities and the social sciences, we offer elective courses and certain core courses for our students. So the core courses are more to do with their communication skills and writing, where also I try to bring in the cultural aspects of gender, of class, of issues of equality and inclusivity, as it were. So those definitely. I do teach to undergraduate students courses like world literature, introduction to world literature. I also teach courses like popular fiction, genre fiction, where I do take up, how narratives and texts, whether they are narratives in terms of films or texts, as it were, of novels or short stories, the impact of them as as cultural discourses, and what they do to perhaps gender, to identity, to issues of equality, and so on. So at the undergraduate level, those would be some of the courses. At for we also have postgraduate programs. So there, largely what and this is a new course that I've just about introduced in a couple of years ago, which was about body image. So this is something that I would be I have been teaching, and that's something that I would focus deeply on, is again the issues that I've been talking about. So while the whole issue of body image and questioning it and analyzing the the related outcomes and consequences of body image discourses, they can be borrowed largely from the Western scholars, right? In the West, this started right about the counterculture period through the 1960s and 70s. So I do borrow a lot from Western scholarship, but India too, right now, if you look at a lot of films that are talking about, so I think one of the good attempts was Dam Laga Ke Haisha, which came out in 2015, a Hindi film. In Bengali, there are a lot of regional films that have also been looking at these issues. So Bengali being my mother tongue, Shunno E Buke, which is again about a woman and her body image. Tamil and Telugu size zero. So there have been a lot of films on these lines. Recently, Bala, which talks about the issue of balding and male body image, as it were. The colorism debates, those. In the last 10 odd years, like body positivity is taking some stronghold on the Indian imagination as well. So we have the Dark is Beautiful movement, which has come up over the last 10 years. We have social media influencers who are talking about these issues. So there are, of course, several texts, especially Chiclet works, and even in the past, people like Manjula Padmanabhan and have addressed the issue of body image in India. Bama, the Dalit writing, which again talks about women and their body identities. So I would say that some of these texts and films would be very relevant, and I will be bringing them up in my courses. So yeah, I mean. these would be some of the courses again that I teach, and I believe I try to bring my message to the students. I'll just share with you two of these, books which have just come out. I am the editor of these with my co-editor. We have, presented this. So this is perhaps one of the first of its kind to talk about the whole business of female body image and beauty politics. And we've had a group of contributors who were, deeply invested in the project, and they gave us a diverse body of, narratives with regard to issues of female body image, as it were. So this is, one of the books that has just come out on, I think last week or so. And I want to just share this as well. So this came out last year in October, and again we had a wonderful group of scholars who talked about the issue of women's access to public places. We had all kinds of narratives, from women working in call centers at night to women bikers, to the kind of social media posts that tell women how to take care of themselves when they are traveling, and so on. So I thought that this also, it had a very powerful group of scholars that came together to present some of these things. So I really look forward to more such possibilities, to bringing more such narratives to the public sphere. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that, and congratulations on the publications. This is very exciting work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.